Hey everyone, I'm Chris Gambit here for B&H, and today I'm here with famed wedding photographer Ryan Brenizer. How's it going, Ryan?
It's going great. I'm really glad to be here.
So Ryan has created the Brenizer effect in photography. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Okay, a lot of people have started calling it Brenizer Method. Some people call it a Bokeh Panorama, which is something a little bit descriptive for it. It's a little bit complicated, so maybe it's easiest to start with an anecdote. A few years ago, I was in Ireland, and I had this beautiful scene in front of me, a lot of interesting architectural details. And I looked at it and I said, I want this scene, this kind of wide scene, but I want to isolate some of the elements. I want a shallow depth of field in it. And so, as you may know, if you're shooting with like a normal lens or a wider lens, there's only so much depth of field you can get, no matter what your aperture is, because it's a shallower focal length.
Right.
So I said to myself, I really want that shallow depth of field of like a 200 at 2.8, but I want that wider frame of view. So kind of a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, if I stitch these together, I should be able to get both. And so, I shot it, I put them all together, and I took it home that night, and it worked out even better than I could imagine. So essentially what it is it's using a panorama, not for the traditional things that we've used panoramas for, which is either a really wide frame of view or really high resolution. You can do both of those too, but what it is to get that really intensely shallow depth of field more than you could physically possibly get with normal lenses.
So what equipment do you really recommend for someone to do this with?
Well, you're going to get the most advantage of it from lenses that are a little bit telephoto and as fast as possible, have sort of a widest maximum aperture as possible. And you're going to want to actually shoot at that wide aperture. The point of this is basically that lenses like an 85-1.4 or Canon's 85-1.2 or something like a 135-1.2 or even a 70-200 2.8 at that long end, anything that creates that really, really shallow depth of field but doesn't have maybe the frame of view that you want is something that's going to be handy when you stitch it together. It's going to create a really, really dramatic effect.
All right, Ryan, why don't you show us how we do this on the computer then?
Absolutely. So we went out, we took international supermodel Chris Gambit out in the New York piers, and we shot some example photos for you guys to kind of show how you would do this with people. So as you can see here from all these pieces of some of the sample shots that we've done, I always like to start with the things that are most important and the things that are going to move. And if you're shooting people, that means shooting the area that includes the face first. So here's a nice little example frame that we did. I started, as you can see, first him. I want to make sure I've got a good expression. If his expression is terrible, then we're going to do all this work and be producing a bad photo, and who wants to do that? So I shot right around him first. So I know that in just 4 frames, very simple, he hasn't moved. We've got him looking good, and I'd rather have stitching errors somewhere off, way off to the left in the background than on the subject of the actual photo. We took 25 photos, and I'll walk you through them very quickly. I'm starting to fill in the background. I know what I want in the frame. I said that this pole is going to look interesting out of focus. It's going to be kind of an interesting background. So I wanted to fill that in, and we've got 25 frames for the full set. Then you go into Photoshop, and whenever you're stitching, you want to go down to the File, Automate, Photo Merge. And you can use Auto, you can use sometimes Perspective. I will tend to start with the Reposition option, because sometimes, especially if you're shooting very wide, like the auto can get wacky. Like if you're shooting with a 50 and turning it into a 24 millimeter or a really wide frame, you'll see some really wacky stretching on the edges. So I want to start with repositioning, simple, and just see how it looks. And the images are going to be blend together, and I've set it to reposition so that there's not going to be any sort of whacking, stretching of any individual images. And Photoshop does the rest of the work. So here we go. You can look at this and you can see, first of all, for kind of a wide frame of view, I mean, this is something that really looks to me like it was shot with maybe a 50 millimeter, maybe a 35 millimeter, somewhere in that range. And I don't care what you were using, there is not a 50 millimeter alive that would shoot that with that kind of depth of field.
What are some tips that you can give to a beginner?
You actually don't need that many photos to get a dramatic effect. If you've ever used, for example, an APS-C camera, a camera with 1.5 crop sensor frame, versus a full frame camera, right? You can get a pretty dramatic effect, a difference in that. And you can recreate that with only like 4 or so frames. If you just click, 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 all of a sudden you've turned that one camera into something that acts like the other. So you should start with not so many frames. Try 4, try 5, try 9, click, 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 click. And you'll find already a dramatic difference in the way the final product comes out. Then, when you get better, when you have the computer power, whatever, build up to it. But start simple. It can really be a dramatic effect, even with just a few photos.
All right, Ryan. Well, thanks for showing us this really, really cool technique.
Thanks so much for having me. This has been great.
If you'd like to know more about fast lenses, tripods, or editing and stitching software, visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. I'm Chris Gambit.
And I'm Ryan Brenizer.
And thanks for watching.